Hi, good morning. This is Dr. Berkey. I'm coming to you live from my bedroom 2 days after having had foot surgery. This is the view I've had for the past couple of days and maybe for tomorrow as well. Anyway, walking is a little bit iffy for me, and there's a lot of snow coming our way. So if I'm on campus, it's going to be there a little later in the day. So we're going to try doing this virtually today. You can watch this from the comfort of your own dorm room. And if I say anything goofy or if I fall asleep, you can blame it on my medication. Anyway, what we're going to do this week is start moving into feudalism. We left off last week talking about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the Christianization of these Germanic tribes. But now I want to talk about the broader economic system that's going to take the place of what we've seen in Europe under the Roman days, and talk about feudalism. I promised as well we'd be watching some Monty Python clips, so I'm going to email a couple of clips your way through Angel Mail. I'd like you to watch those before Wednesday. As you're watching them, think a little bit about, in every little bit of humor, there's some truth. And where do you find truth? Where do you find some valid criticisms of medieval life in these Monty Python clips? Because they are there. There's obviously some vast inaccuracies, but they're funny because in many ways they're true. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday, along with some other things. So very briefly this morning, I want to talk about feudalism. What is it? How does it come about? What happens to Europe during that first half a millennium or so after the fall of the Roman Empire? And then we'll move on next Wednesday to talk about the Crusades and some other hallmarks of the Middle Ages. Feudalism. First of all, let's think about where it comes from. And in order to think about this, we need to consider what happens at the end of the Roman Empire when there is no government. What happens when it falls apart? You see, in the area, or in the time of these Germanic invasions, Roman imperial government had to pull back. And so you had these Roman troops, administrators that would gradually pull back from the frontiers. They pulled back from Britain, they pulled back from France and elsewhere. And as they retrench, as they pull back, there's a power gap. And so the Gallo-Romans, the Romanized people in what is today France, or Romanized Britain, they had to fend for themselves. And there really was no authority anymore that was powerful enough to control such a vast area. And so what you had is men who could fight, or who owned horses, or who were wealthy, or who had time to learn how to fight, or who just rode around in groups of thugs. Became these bands of warriors, and in the vast defenseless society, the overwhelming majority of people who had to work the land, they had no choice but to work. They also had no choice but to reach out to these local strongmen and ask that particular lord for protection. And so these local lords would replace Roman administrators. These lords were oftentimes, and again I use that term loosely because they were oftentimes just bands of thugs. But this became feudalism. The overwhelming majority of people giving up their rights to land ownership in exchange for protection from the local lord or thug. And this is what emerges in the couple hundred of years or so following the decline of Rome. A political power really rests in the hands of a small military elite of people. And this is a military society where things are determined by preparation for war. The highest virtue rather, is loyalty. In order to ensure the support of his fighters, a lord would give his fighters land in exchange for their loyalty. Charles Martel, for example, the grandfather of Charlemagne, gave land to his men, mostly by taking property from the church. And so you would have stronger lords defeat weaker lords, take their property, give it to their followers, and gradually these kingdoms would grow bigger and bigger and bigger. The economic power of these feudal lords rested upon landed estates that were worked by peasants. Now a peasant is essentially a landless farmer. He's tied to his lord through process, a system, what is called manorialism. Peasants needed the protection, and lords demanded something in return for that protection. And so the peasant or the serf was basically obligated to turn over to the lord a percentage of his annual harvest. Peasant would pay a fee if he wanted to marry somebody from outside the estate. He was part of his lord's permanent workforce. You see, there was a lot of free, uncultivated land in those days, and so lords encouraged population growth and immigration. And so over the course of these couple hundred years, free farmers slowly submitted themselves to the power of lords. And so we get to the point at about 800 AD, a couple hundred years after the fall of the Roman Empire, or a few hundred after. And now we're at the point where most of European society, we're talking about people who had been free a century beforehand, had by this point been reduced to serfdom. This is the process of that a majority of Europeans would live in for the next 1,000 years. Peasantry, serfdom. Now, life in the early Middle Ages was very, very rough. Germanic society was devoted to fighting. Warriors stood very good chances of being injured by sword in battle, battle axe, some blunt instrument, or injured while trying to eke out an existence with some poor tools. Very poor diets, low resistance to disease. People didn't bathe much, very low standards of hygiene. And moreover, as we talked about last week, these Germanic people also lost that rational understanding of the natural world that had been emerging in the Greek and Roman worlds. Germans tended to believe that disease was caused by one of three things: Elfshot, worm-like creatures in the body, the number 9, and so treatment often involved charms, amulets, incantations, potions. Women could drink these drinks made from mistletoe that were thought to be an antidote to poison, or they would make women fertile. As we get later on into the Middle Ages, you'll see increasingly these old Greek manuscripts working their way back through the Arabic world, but this early Middle Ages is a time of vast illiteracy and ignorance. Now you're going to watch a video later today